Colors are one of the most complicated parts of deco, and I spent years learning to get good at them. Lucky for you, it'll only take you 30 minutes to go from this to this. By the end of this video, you'll be far better at using colors, and you'll know the secret ways pro creators use color in their own levels. But before we start, let's make some things clear. Most color knowledge you'll see online is just plain wrong, and we should look at the basics to see why. You see, what we describe as color is really just light traveling in different wavelengths. In the real world, object color comes from the light wavelengths they reflect, while they absorb all other wavelengths. In Geometry Dash, your screen is the light source, so your display is made to emit light of different types, which we also see as color. The wavelengths of light determine the hue, red, green, purple, and so on. The less wavelengths of light you have, the more saturated and pure the color becomes. More saturated colors use just one wavelength, while less saturated ones combine more of them together. The strength of this light determines value, which is how light or dark the actual color is. In Geometry Dash, you move the outside ring of the color selector to choose a hue, then use a circle on the inside to choose the saturation and value. If you're using the RGB button, the first 3 sliders independently change hue, saturation, and value. And if you select an object and go to the color selection menu, the HSV button here also changes these aspects as well. But with all this in mind, what should you try to learn first? Value, saturation, or hue? Naturally, hue is what most people say. It's one of the most discussed things in color theory, and it even has its own special part on color selectors. You'll often hear about color schemes if you're on the internet, which are combinations of colors that should go well together, and those can't exist without hue. It's also the most intuitive thing, since it's how we name colors in the first place. But none of this actually makes hue the right answer, because while I've mentioned what colors are, we still need to discuss how your brain processes it. The human eye has 2 types of light receptors: rods, which process how bright a light is, and cones, which process saturation and hue. Rods are incredibly sensitive to light, and they're spread out all over the eye, while cones are less sensitive and largely centered around the center of your vision. Just to put things into perspective, here's this level but with all the hues removed, and here's the same level but with all the colors at the same value. Since human eyes are so sensitive to value, you should focus on it the most when starting to choose colors. It may feel weird at first since everyone talks about hue instead, but good values will lead to good hues, not the other way around. In fact, with the right values, you can make any colors look good, which actually makes color schemes kind of useless. Once you start focusing on value, what's next? How do you know which values are the right ones, and how can you even tell if your values need to be changed? Well, the simple answer is planning. Imagine you have every gray color from black to white on a value scale like this. Let's say you're trying to make some block designs, a background, and a foreground. You don't want your level to look like this, where everything is messy because the blocks, foreground, and background all use similar values. Instead, you should try picking out a few specific values each element should use. For instance, you can make the foreground the darkest, make the blocks use dark gray, and use light gray and white to plan out the background. When you add more details to this deco, you can use these value plans to make a value range, which lets you have more variety while still keeping the details clear. What matters the most, though, is contrast. You want people to easily see where one object ends and the next begins. Making their values really different is the best way to do that. For example, you could have the foreground be the darkest, make the background the brightest, and let the blocks use everything else in between. In the most ideal situation, these value ranges won't overlap at all, so there's clear separation between each object. But that's not always possible, as you'll see soon enough. Once you have your value ranges picked out, you still have to choose how wide you want them to be. Do you want your background to have the widest value range, or do you want that value range to go to the blocks? A wider value range lets you fit more detail in your object, and the more varied those values are, the more interesting your deco becomes. Most of the time, you'll want your important objects to have the most variety, so a wider value range, and less important objects to have a smaller range. Depending on the value ranges you choose and the amount of contrast between each value range, your colors will have a lot more clarity, which leads to better colors. How do GD creators use this knowledge in their levels? Well, even if they don't plan out every single value range, most skill creators still make use of value variety and contrast in many ways. A simple example is with the level POW, where the block designs in this part are very bright while the background and foreground are quite dark. You can also see different levels of darkness within the background, and many objects in the blocks that are either much darker or much brighter than the normal purple. So we get a value range that looks like this. Simple, but very effective. The blocks have the most contrast and variety, which keeps things really clear. But what if you're making something more complex? In the last part of Nexus's level Space-Time Continuum, there's 4 or 5 distinct things on screen at once, each of which is important to the level. Here's what their value ranges look like. The blocks have 2 distinct values, which are also the most contrasting in this part. While everything else in the background has far more variety, the blocks rely on raw contrast to stand out, which works because nothing else in the scene has as much contrast as them. The rest of the background uses more value variety than anything. Here's a value range for the planet, the superstructure, space itself, and the star. You can see a good amount of overlap in these value ranges, and while that's partly due to glow and gradients, it mostly works out here. After all, the most important things are the blocks, which have the most contrast against the background, and the planet with the star, since they both contrast the darkness of space and the actual superstructure. The main downside of just relying on value is that as your deco gets more complex, it becomes tougher and tougher to keep everything readable. Before you actually pick out value ranges, you should use 3 or 4 values to fill everything with colors. The goal here is to make your deco readable before there's tons of detail in the way, so the most important parts of your scene should be easy to see even with a few values. So what if we reduced these levels to use only a few values? This works, and so does this. Okay, there might be an issue here. Value alone can't make your level fully readable because it's just one of 3 dimensions of color. As your decoration gets more complex, you have to start thinking about the other parts of color too. So let's talk about hue. There are lots of ways to categorize hues, like primary, secondary, and so on, but the simplest category is just temperature. Warm colors are on this half of the color wheel, while cool colors are on this side. If you think of real life, you could use warm colors to paint things like the sun, fire, or red hot chili peppers, and cool things for ice, melted ice, and soft ice. Now there are some simple uses for these colors. You can make a rainy city with cool colors and then add bits of fire or lava with the warm ones, for instance, but there's far more potential in the vibes these color temperatures give. Depending on the details you create, you can make your level feel warm and inviting by using warm colors on softer shapes, or too hot to handle by making your spikes, saws, and other hazards red. Your level could feel like a chill stroll through the forest at night, or an uninviting environment that wants you dead. Now granted, these are all obvious examples since these levels are kind of realistic, but the same ideas can be used anywhere. More generally, you can abuse one of the reasons why color temperature is so effective, no matter what style you use. You can probably guess what I mean if you look at the color wheel and take a random warm color alongside a random cool one, but I'll come back to this later. For now, here's another color question. Which of these 2 squares is brighter, the left one or the right? Well, they're actually the same color. You've probably seen this illusion before, and it's a great example of color relativity. Basically, the way we see colors depends on the other colors around them. The artist and YouTuber Marco Bucci once described it as colors talking to each other, and it's quite a useful property to keep in mind when choosing colors. Color relativity is actually part of why color schemes aren't as useful as you may think, because seeing colors in flat rectangles will be very different from seeing them in an actual design. Usually, this can be leveraged when combining colors with lighting, like in this part of the space-time continuum. The shadows of the blocks appear as red, yellow, and blue, but if you just selected an object at random, you'd see that it's most likely gray or yellow instead. Because these less saturated colors appear next to really vibrant ones, our brains interpret the colors differently than if they appeared on their own. In addition to color relativity, another trick to using more interesting hues is color constancy. Do you see how the snow here looks gray even though it's actually a desaturated blue? That's because our brain can deduce what color something is even if you change the lighting conditions it's under. If you put something like a glow overlay on top of a design, it's still possible to tell what color you're using. It's why you can tell a red box is red even if you put it under blue or purple lights. Both of these properties together actually give you a lot of freedom in choosing colors, as they increase the amount of hue and saturation variety you can have in your levels. You don't have to make every color the most vibrant, bright, saturated hue for people to know, oh, this is red. And you don't have to make your less saturated colors completely gray for people to see them as gray. You can even add bits of contrasting hues at the edge to other colors to give them more variety. Notice how the shadows in this level aren't fully gray and instead have a blue tint to them. you still know what colors the objects are even though the shadows look blue. Or here, notice how the edges of these rings and the circles have lots of different hues to them. The rings have chromatic aberration on the edges, while the circles in the background cycle through different colors along their edges, which makes this part look far more interesting. And the reason why tricks like these work is hue contrast. Colors that are further apart on the color wheel will contrast more, and having contrast will make your work more interesting. This is also why color temperature can be so useful. Warm colors and cool ones are on the opposite side of the color wheel, and that's the most contrast you can have in your hues. It's kind of like putting black next to white, it's the most contrast you can get at one time. And just like with value contrast earlier, you can divide your work into different hue ranges, where the more contrast you have, the more clarity your colors will get. Hue, and by extension saturation, also let you distinguish colors even if they have really similar values, which is super helpful for complicated levels with lots of intricate details. Once you're used to working with value, you can use the same tricks to plan out your hues as well. You can basically plan out the hues for different parts of your decoration, make sure your level is readable with both value and hue, and then expand these hues into hue ranges. For instance, this level uses green for the blocks, red for the spikes, and then a gradient from red to green for the sky in the background. But how do you actually decide which hues to use? And more importantly, how do you decide the amount of saturation each color should have? If you just make everything insanely saturated or really desaturated, you'll either end up with a deep fried mess or a level that's basically all gray, and neither of these are ideal for most people. One solution to this is gamut maps. Remember earlier when I said color schemes are kinda useless? Well, they still are, don't get me wrong, but there is a way to make them useful no matter how experienced you are. Basically, imagine taking the normal color wheel and extending it so you can fit less saturated colors in the center. Normally with color schemes, you'd choose colors based on where they exist in the wheel. Complementary, split complementary, triadic, and so on. With gamut maps, you can still do this, but now you account for the saturation of these colors as well. Usually this will create a simple shape on the color wheel like this, which you can then use to select your colors. When done well, you can have some really good looking colors, and instead of just limiting yourself to one dimension of hue, you now have 2 dimensions to choose colors from. Gamut maps can be really useful for color mixing. Since you're working with colors in a certain range, you can be pretty sure that any colors inside the gamut will mix together well, as long as you give them the right values. This means that unlike with normal color schemes, where you restrict yourself to only a few hues at one time, you can use basically any number of colors, which massively increases how much variety you can have. One way to use this is with desaturated colors. When you're moving between 2 saturated colors in your gamut, any mix of those colors will be less saturated and closer to gray. You can use this really easily to transition between contrasting colors, since placing gray between them will look more natural and less awkward. Another great example of this is hue shifting, which is an easy way to make your glow look far more vibrant. The basic idea is that you take a light source that uses a blending color and duplicate the glow on top of it. This new glow should be larger, more saturated, and a slightly different color as well. If you do this correctly, you'll end up with really vibrant gradients that look far more interesting than if you didn't have any hue variety. To be fair, there's a lot more that goes into hue shifting, mostly knowing what color to make the outer glow shift towards, but that requires some extra hue knowledge. For now, let's look at another gamut example, being Duck Step by Knots. This level has a lot of stuff going on here, like the mech and the environment in the background, the actual block designs, and so on. There's a lot of variety here, and that's made much easier by having color gamut. For instance, the beak of the mech has multiple hues on it, and so does the foliage. Without these small variations, the level wouldn't look nearly as good. You can learn a lot about your colors by analyzing the gamut they make. A simple gamut shape, like a triangle or square, is usually much easier to manage than a complicated shape. So try looking for these gamut shapes in your deco. As another note, the more color variety you have, the more filled in your gamut shape will be. To see how your gamuts look, you can screenshot your level and put it in a program like Kgamut. It lets you see what colors you're using, as well as which hues correspond to which values. I've left a link to it in the video description if you want to check it out yourself. We've gone over value and value ranges, color relativity and constancy, and using gamut maps to make your colors far more interesting. But there's still more than just theory about how to use colors. You still need to learn how to use them in practice. Like, how do you actually choose good colors at all? You can use theory to make your color choices look good, but you need to actually know what colors to choose in the first place. Well, this is actually simple depending on what you're making. If your level is more realistic, you can choose colors based on what objects look like in real life. Make your grass green, the sky blue, and so on. If you really don't know what colors an object has, you can just Google it and find references to base your colors on. But if you're making something more magical or fantasy based, you'll probably want to change up some colors to reflect this. Instead of green grass, maybe go with red or blue. Make your trees red with patches of glowing yellow fruit in them, and replace the sky with red or gray stone. Oh hey, that's another. If you're making something really abstract like a classic design level, you'll have the most freedom and therefore the most choices to make. You can really just choose whatever colors you like. No, like literally make a design, select some color channels, and just mess around until you find some colors you like. This is genuinely a great method for finding color combos in general, since you're seeing how the colors look in a real design instead of using an arbitrary set of hex codes on a website. The problem is, it's also really slow, especially when you're just starting out. If you want to find color combos faster, there's a far more effective method you can use. To explain it, here's another question. What color do you wear to a funeral? If you're in a Western country like the United States, you'll probably answer black. But in many Eastern countries like China, the answer would be white. This is a great example of color symbolism, where certain colors are associated with specific objects or meanings. That's why you'll see colors like red used for danger, green to continue in action, and so on. In fact, you can make use of real-life objects in the same way, regardless of how abstract your deco is. Blue and white for a sky-themed level, yellow, green, and black for poison or toxins, red and orange for fire, and so on. You can also abuse color temperature for this as well, since that's another way colors are associated with certain meanings. As I said earlier, warm colors could be warm and welcoming or hot and harsh, while cool colors would be chill and calming or far too frigid. This is one of the most effective ways to find color combos, since it has all the benefits of real-world color choices without restricting you to making realistic stuff. However, there are 3 downsides to these methods. For one, hue choices don't completely affect how intense your level is, so you'll need to rely on value and saturation as well. You already know how this works though. Use more value contrast for more intensity and more saturation for vibrant colors, which covers most circumstances where you need your level's mood to get more or less intense. The bigger problem is that these parts of colors aren't independent. If you look at these colors, you might think this yellow is brighter than the blue here, and you'd be right. But if I compare these blues, even though the more vibrant one appears to be brighter, it's actually not. You've probably heard about this issue if you watch art channels like Marco Bucci, and on the surface it doesn't seem to be that bad. Certain colors appear to be brighter than others even if you give them the same value, and saturation changes how bright we think a color is. So what? Well, first you can use this property when choosing colors for hue shifting. Red, green, and blue will appear darker than other colors, so you can transition from yellow, cyan, or magenta to these colors and make a hue shift that looks more natural. This also means your hue choices matter a lot more for value contrast. If you start your decoration in black and white to choose good values, and then try switching over to color, you'll need to double check that you're still using the right values. This should be fairly simple. Just take a picture of your work and desaturate it, then look in the values in grayscale. Except this is also inaccurate too. Because of how grayscale filters are coded, they make saturated colors appear lighter than they actually should be. This means you can't rely on them to be fully accurate. The best way to accurately check your values is to open up an image editor, fill a new layer entirely with black, and set its blending mode to color. Or if you're in Geometry Dash, take a grayscale shader trigger, set the fade time to 0, and enable Use Luminosity. Speaking of triggers, they're really important for good colors in Geometry Dash. After all, they're how you can go from stuff like this to this. You can make your colors so much more interesting if you include color changes or use triggers to make all sorts of crazy effects. So let's talk about it. The simplest trigger for changing colors is the color trigger. I don't know what you thought I'd say. To use it, you select a color channel, set a new color for it, and decide how many seconds it'll take to change the color. Any object using that color channel will have their color change whenever you activate the trigger. The pulse trigger is really similar, but you can change the colors of a color channel or a group of your choice. In addition, its effects are temporary, so there is now a time for the color to change, a length of time for the new color to stay, and a time to revert back to the old color. These triggers are constantly used for effects and color changes, like the 9 circles effect or just general color pulsing. If you set a low fade in time for a pulse and give it a long fade out time, you'll get a quick burst of color like these levels. And if you go with a longer fade in and short fade out, you get a steady build up. Update 2.2 added 3 other triggers for changing colors. 3 other useful triggers. The first is grayscale, which is nice for checking your values as I mentioned earlier. The only feature I didn't mention before is use channel, which lets you tint the screen with a color channel of your choice instead of just being pure gray. You can also enter really huge numbers into the intensity field to make your level look really deep fried like this. Next is area tint, which works like the pulse trigger but only when you're within a certain distance of it. Area triggers are really complex, so there's an entire guide in our Discord server on them, which you should join through this link for hundreds of guides on how to make good levels. But besides the universal features like length and the target group, the main feature here is HSV. Like the pulse trigger, you can choose a color channel that your object will change color to. But unlike pulse, the default option is changing the HSV of your objects. This exists in the pulse trigger, color channels, and in the color trigger if you enable copy color. Instead of setting every object to the same color, HSV transforms their current color by a certain amount. Think of it like a multiplier or transformer on existing colors. You can also extend the range of the brightness and saturation sliders with these checkboxes. Although doing that on the actual objects makes it really hard to change their HSV with triggers. The third trigger is Edit Color, which works like a post-processing effect. The bottom 3 sliders let you change the brightness of each color component, while the top 3 modify how much contrast there is. This can be really useful for increasing contrast and making levels look nicer, or making brightness sliders for different devices. But hold on, what is a color component anyways? And what use do they have outside the Edit Color trigger? Well, a color component is part of how your screen shows colors. Every pixel on your screen is made of a small red, green, and blue light. Each of these lights can be controlled by a number which goes from 0, which is totally dark, to 255, which is as bright as possible. In the editor, if you're changing the value of a color channel, you can use the RGB numbers here to modify how bright the red, green, and blue components of the color channel will be. You may have also seen hex codes before when talking about colors, and they're the same idea, just using hexadecimal to represent the colors instead. There's also opacity, which is a component that makes colors see-through. You can set this in your color channels or with the color trigger, and you can also use the alpha and area fade triggers to set opacity with groups. Now, on their own, color components don't do much, but when combined with triggers, you can do some insane things. Normally, you'll use opacity to mix different colors, like when making flat gradient. However, if you have 2 objects with the same colors but different opacity, they'll appear to make the same color no matter which object is on top, which lets you make effects like the block design here. If you stack a bunch of copy-pasted objects, you can also get cool colors by slowly changing their opacity over time. But opacity is just one of many ways to combine colors together that can be used for effects. One really useful property of color channels is blending. If you enable this checkbox on a color channel or in the color trigger, your object's color will get added to any colors below them. For instance, if you have a pure red object with blending and add it to a pure blue object, you'll get magenta, as each object's RGB values get added together. Just this property alone has an insane number of uses, so here are some of them. If you put a blending object in front of a white object, you'll still get white because the color components are already maxed out. This means if you make decoration out of all blending objects, you can make this deco only show up on non-white objects. For instance, if you make some decoration, make your blocks out of all black objects, and have a white background, you can get effects like this. On the other hand, if you make an object black with blending, it'll become invisible because you're adding 0 to all of the color components. If you use an object with 2 color channels and make one of them invisible, you can make all sorts of interesting shapes with these objects. This is used a lot in more complicated deco like this. Third thing is a saturation cancel effect. If you take a blending object, duplicate it, and set the hue slider in the duplicated object to 180, you'll get pure gray. If you now put these objects on different layers and put another object in between them, you can get the original color back. This means you can make a level transition from grayscale to colored right before the player's eyes. These last 2 masks are a bit more complicated. The RGB mask uses a similar idea as the white mask. Since yellow, cyan, and magenta all max out 2 color components, if you add red, green, or blue to them, you won't see any color change. You can make one design that uses white and yellow, put a black layer above it, and create another layer using red or green in that second design, and they'll look completely separate from each other. This is how to make things like this, or this, but it comes at a cost. Because of how specific your color choices have to be, you're far more limited with what you can make with the effect. This is also the case with the CMYK mask. Instead of using red, green, and blue as a base for the mask, this uses cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or key, to make each color work. CMYK is typically used by printers since it's a subtractive color model, where you start with white and darken things. If you make designs that have a base of cyan, magenta, or yellow, and then add blending red, green, or blue objects on top of them, you can mask 3 designs all at once, like this. Just like the RGB mask, colors are really tricky to use here, and you also have to use opacity on the blending red, green, and blue parts. Otherwise, you'll just get pure white, which won't show the designs. Keep in mind, all of the effects I showed use just blending. If you use a gradient trigger at any point, you'll have 2 more options for colors: multiply, which will multiply the colors by the RGB values you put into the gradient trigger, and invert, which subtracts one color from the other so that you always have positive RGB values. You can use multiply to filter certain color components, like using a cyan gradient to remove all red from your deco. And you can use 2 invert gradients on different layers to invert any deco between them without affecting the other layers. We're just at the start of update 2.2, so there's probably a lot more color effects waiting to be discovered. The funny thing is, all of these crazy color effects kind of obscure another way to use triggers, which feels so simple it's insanely easy to overlook. If you've played a game like Hollow Knight, you might notice how the colors go from all blue, to blue and green, to yellow and blue, and so on. Or how in Terraria the world literally changes color depending on the event you're in. As simple as it is, using different color schemes for different parts of your level is really effective at conveying different moods to your level, or creating a sense of progression over time. For instance, you can make one color scheme for one part, change to another set of colors in the next, and repeat as much as you need. This lets you create certain moods in your level and change them over time, like starting with lots of color variety and slowly progressing towards black, or doing the opposite and making your level turn more varied and vibrant as the song picks up. Another thing you can do is increase the contrast for intense sections of your level and lower it when the level calms down, which is really effective for basically any level. But speaking of effectiveness, it's the third big issue with how you choose colors. Since everyone perceives color differently, everyone will react to your colors in unique ways. There are a lot of ways your level could be shown to a player, and depending on their display settings, screen color space, or even the lighting in their room, your level will look different. You can't account for most of these factors, but some of them are within your control, like making your level colorblind friendly or accounting for epilepsy. After all, part of being a good creator is making your level accessible to as many people as possible. Plus, it's really not that hard to make your level accessible. For things like epilepsy, don't use tons of rapid flashing in your level. It's honestly kind of annoying to see, and if you overuse it, then the effect becomes less and less effective. If you absolutely need to have rapid flashing, you should add an option to disable it in your level. As for color blindness, there are websites that simulate it, so you can adjust your hues to be easier to distinguish or make a custom colorblind filter for your level. Additionally, make sure your objects can also be distinguished by their shape and not just hue. What's more difficult is creating while colorblind, but it's not impossible either. Some of my friends managed to do this, and I've picked up some tips from them as a result. The simplest trick is just using hues you can distinguish well, although that doesn't always work for every level. However, the color selectors in Geometry Dash are always the exact same, like red will always be in these places, green here, and so on. So as you get more experience, you can kind of brute force color selection by memorizing where certain colors are. And of course, feedback helps a lot to make sure your colors look good, so make sure you get opinions from other people as much as possible. Now granted, you'll need a good sense for colors if you want to make this work. However, that's always the case whether you're colorblind or not. No matter how many theories about color you learn, you'll struggle to make better colors if you don't improve your actual intuition. One way to improve this is by seeing what other people do. There are lots of good GD levels, art pieces, TV shows, movies, and other visuals with good colors. If you analyze how other people use colors, you'll get to see what works and what doesn't far faster than you can make new levels. You can even do things like studies, where you try recreating stuff from other creators and artists to learn how they use color. If you do this, focus on accurately remaking the colors without using things like color pickers, seeing what value ranges are used, and even what you could do differently from your reference. Doing studies is one of the most effective ways to improve your colors, but you still need to actually decorate to apply those skills. If you're not already familiar, you should watch this video to learn how to actually start decorating in the first place.